Hello, everyone, and today we're going to talk about real estate strategies that we can learn from the board game, the classic board game of Monopoly. Recently, my kids, my wife, and I were playing Monopoly, and I noticed how everybody had their own little strategy going on. And there were a lot of lessons learned out of that game because, see, in real life, the same thing happens when it comes to investing. If you have a solid strategy, you could really develop a solid portfolio of properties depending on what you want to do, whether you're building cash flow, you're building equity. So we're going to start breaking down some of these strategies, but most importantly is we're going to compare how the game of Monopoly can teach you or teach your family how to invest in real estate. The objective of the game is really simple. This game, the board game, the Monopoly Classic, starts really easily. You start at the go, and then the whole point is to go around, and as you throw your dice, you'll be landing on a square. Now, as you land in these particular squares, you get the option to either buy property, you can ignore it, or you could actually pay rent to somebody else that owns it. For example, if you land in Oriental Avenue, you have the option to buy it for $100. Or if somebody else owns it, well, you pay them the rent because you have a little card, right? So if the rent is $75, well, you pay them because they already own it. Or you could just ignore it and not buy that property because you are strategizing trying to buy those of the same color. Remember, you have a limited amount of cash. So this is a game, but just like in real life, you have a limited amount of cash and you have to use that wisely in order to strategize on how you're going to diversify your portfolio. Now, as you go around and start buying different properties, the whole goal of the game is to buy those of the same color. If you buy all the three light purple, what happens is it allows you to start placing properties, right? You start placing houses where you could increase the rent. Okay, so that is the whole point. Now, also when you go around all the way, you collect $200. So all of this is just so that I can really clearly set the precedent of how real estate strategies apply to this game and how you could use the strategies from this game in real life. Okay, so we'll start by breaking one of the first real life strategies that we can learn from the game of Monopoly, and that strategy is the equity appreciation strategy. My son, this time we were playing last week, he planned one of his classic strategies, which is he wanted to go for Boardwalk and Park Place, as you can see on the screen. Boardwalk and Park Place are the most expensive properties you could buy on. These ones are $400 or $350, right? So remember, that's about a third or a fourth of your total cash allowance that you get at the beginning of the game. So this is a really expensive property. So my son started passing all the opportunities that he had at the beginning of the game in order to save his money to buy Boardwalk and Park Place because he really wanted to buy those. Now, so that's a good strategy when it works, right? But at the same time, it doesn't always work. In real life, when you buy equity, you have to time it correctly. You want to buy the property at the right location, at the right place, which is like Boardwalk and Park Place, right? Location, location, location. But at the same time, you have to time it right. See, the market cycle is only a short period of time, meaning it goes up and goes down. But if you don't know exactly where you are in the market cycle, you could lose your shirt. And that's exactly the same thing that happened to my son. He kept waiting and waiting, and by the time he was able to use his money to buy, well, guess what? Nobody really landed in his property. Nobody ever really paid him cash flow. And he had invested at that point a heavy amount of money on buying those that by the time that the game kept going and going, he ran out of cash flow. He ended up giving those properties to his sister for pennies on the dollar. So really what happened is, a lot of people end up buying properties and they may think they are the best investment strategies because these properties can appreciate in cash flow. Well, if the market cycle changes on you, guess what? You end up giving up your property for pennies of the dollar, or the bank already takes it, right? As it happened in 2008, 2006, in that market cycle crash in the housing market. So same thing happens here. And I was telling my son that he took a bet on appreciation. right? So he went for those properties. He passed on many other investment opportunities, but by the time he was able to buy these properties, it was already too late. Nobody really landed on his property, and by then he had to just mortgage them, and then his sister was able to bail him out, but by then he had to just pretty much give out all of his properties, and it wasn't really a good investment strategy. The second strategy is high risk and high reward. See, when my son started losing on the equity strategy, what he actually ended up doing is he made me a little bet on the side. And he said, Daddy, I'm going to give you this one property that I needed. It was one particular color. So I'm going to give it to you, but you're going to pay me, not right now because I didn't have any cash. So he said, you're going to pay me like $300, but then he was going to charge me every time I rolled the dice 10%. So I took the bet, and I ended up losing quite heavily because I ended up rolling the dice over and over and over, and I ended up paying a lot, like 80% on the money. So it was a great strategy on his part. It was a bad strategy on my part because I bet on trying to get out all the way across to the go box and get the money back and pay him off. It actually didn't work out for me like that. I ended up paying him a lot of interest because my bet was that I was going to roll out heavy numbers on my dice and go all the way around. See, in real life, high risk, high reward opportunities are properties that you could buy that maybe you're betting a lot of money up front and don't necessarily generate a lot of cash flow. For example, you could buy a piece of land and it's in a great location. But if you really don't have a solid team that can help you build on that piece of land, you could end up choking yourself. And that's the risk, meaning it may be a great opportunity to buy a piece of land cheap, but if you buy it with debt, you could really choke. So I really never recommend anybody to buy land with debt. Try to buy it with equity, meaning get some equity partners perhaps that could participate on the gains, but don't necessarily choke you on the debt, because the mortgage payments on a property that's not producing income is the worst strategy you could select, and that's really where a lot of people end up betting heavily on properties that don't necessarily produce income, and you don't want to do that. You want to buy properties that cash flow, and it takes me then to the next strategy, which is strategy number 3. Cash flow. See, my daughter was the smartest out of the team. She ended up buying properties in this row, which was, we actually call it debt row. Why? Because she started first buying heavily a lot of properties, and I thought she was trying to use the equity appreciation strategy, meaning she was going to buy a lot of properties and trying to just sell them to the highest bidder, because she has done that before. For example, she will start buying even some of the cheapest properties, but then whenever she would realize that somebody else needed it, she would just sell them at a higher price and use that money to build cash flow properties in other areas. See, that is a great strategy in real life. It applies to this game, but it also applies to real life. And the way it does apply in real life is a lot of people say, well, cash flow is a great strategy, it's a great idea. But in reality, I don't have the means to buy a property and hold it because it only produces $100, $200 in cash flow, or sometimes I actually have to pay out of my pocket to keep that property. So I can't really get into the cash flow game because I don't have the means to do so. Well, my recommendation is start small. Maybe you have to start by sacrificing some fix and flip properties, build up some equity, and use that equity to start buying some cash flowing properties. It's the exact same thing my daughter did. She started buying some properties. She flipped them to her mother. She flipped them to me. She flipped them to Nathan, to my son. And my daughter was able to build this equity and then start buying a lot of houses in debt row. By the time that the game was almost over, I mean, it was horrible just to land in any piece of property here because we would run out of cash. And the same thing you could apply in real life, meaning you could start small, you could buy properties and use that equity to buy properties that could produce a steady monthly income. And that's really what you want to do. I mean, it may not look like a lot when you're getting $200, $300 a month in cash flow, but when you start building a portfolio of cash flow producing properties, and you have 10, 15, 20 properties that are producing $200, $300 a month, then you start receiving your financial freedom that you're looking for. So cash flow is a great investment strategy that you could use. You could learn it from the basic game of Monopoly, but you could also apply it in real life. So these are the basic strategies that you could apply in real estate, and you could apply it in this game. Meaning, learn them in your game. This is just fake money. These are fake properties, right? But you could practice and teach these strategies to your kids, because the moment they start understanding the difference between equity, the difference between high risk, high reward, and understanding the benefits of cash flow, then the little seed starts planting in their head, so that they start looking at, well, what could I do here? Should I risk it on some high risk, high reward, and make a side bet with someone to maybe just generate some cash flow and possibly win or possibly lose? Should I go with the location and try to buy Park Place and Broadway and maybe have someone land in these properties and I make it big? Or should I play it safe and just buy cash flow, put a bunch of little properties, get with hotels, and then end up getting, cash flow king? So these little strategies apply in real life. And that's really what I want to teach you tonight. So look at the game of Monopoly. Pretty simple game. But at the end of the day, it could teach you a lot of strategies that apply in real life scenarios.